Josh?
Brian. Josh couldn't make it this afternoon.
Somebody in my staff is going to have a broken finger.
Thank you, Chairwoman Young. Thank you, Chairman Farrell. I know you guys have been here a long time today, so I'll try to keep our comments brief. But my name is Brian Noonan. I'm with Associated Builders and Contractors. Our organization represents nearly 400 merit shop contractors throughout New York State. I'm here today to express our support for the governor's ambitious plan to fix our crumbling infrastructure. These improvements include critical upgrades to everything from roads, bridges, and sewers to utilities and wastewater systems. Simply put, they add to the quality of life to New Yorkers on a daily basis. Few here would disagree in saying that these upgrades are badly needed and have been for a number of years. The governor's proposal is pegged at roughly $100 billion over 5 years. Given that New York is close to its debt cap, some estimates are we within $800 million, it's clear that agencies and authorities will be issuing bonds to cover the cost of construction. While this is not ideal, infrastructure improvements are a good use of bonds. So if we are going to bond this work, then you have an obligation to ensure that the taxpayers of this great state get the maximum value for their investment. That means putting these projects out to bid without costly gimmicks like project labor agreements, otherwise known in the industry as PLAs. I will assume that most of you here are familiar with PLAs. For those who are not, these costly provisions are agreements made between the owner of a project and the building trades unions. They mandate that the vast majority of workers on a job site are from the union halls. Typically, this means 3 out of every 4 workers. This excludes workers who choose not to join a union from working on the project. They have also been proven to drive up costs on a project upwards of 30%. This comes from diminished competition that they create along with antiquated jurisdictional work rules that accompany PLAs. You don't need to look far to see a failure of a PLA on a publicly funded infrastructure project. The Exit 122 rehabilitation project along Route 17 had issued its bid when the New York State DOT rescinded it and issued a new one with a mandated PLA attached. The project was delayed more than a year. While New York received an initial low bid of approximately $65 million, this bid was put aside in favor of one with the inclusion of a PLA. When all was said and done, the total project cost approached $100 million, over $30 million higher than the bid without the attachment of a PLA. This is just one example. There are, in fact, dozens more just like it. With these numbers being discussed here today, the amount being wasted would skyrocket from tens of millions to hundreds of millions. The taxpayers of New York State deserve the best value at the best price. While we desperately need these investments, we also need them done the right way. To attach PLAs simply to appease certain groups while excluding others is not good for anyone. By allowing for a free, open, transparent bidding process, everyone has a chance at work. This does not hurt anyone the way PLAs do, and everyone has the same fair chance. Most importantly, taxpayers will see their money go further, and more of these crucial upgrades can take place. While I am here, I would be remiss if I did not also speak briefly on Wick's Law and Scaffold Law. These regulations drive up the cost of construction to the detriment of taxpayers and customers across the state, and have made New York one of the most costly states in which to build. Serious reform needs to be looked at in both cases, and our organization would always be willing to sit down with you and discuss real, practical, common-sense solutions to resolving some of the issues most prevalent and problematic to the contractors in New York State. Thank you once again for your time.
Okay, thank you very much. Anybody have any questions? Okay, very articulate. Thank you very much.
Tri-State Transportation Campaign, Nadine Lemon. Director, New York Federal Policy.
Good afternoon.
Good
Thank you for the opportunity to allow us to testify today. My name is Nadine Lemon, and I am the New York and Federal Policy Director for Tri-State Transportation Campaign. We're a policy and advocacy organization working on a sustainable transportation future. As transportation advocates, we, of course, were thrilled to hear about the bold plans the governor has laid on the table for infrastructure in this state. Many of the proposals, like third track on Long Island, revamping Penn Station, the Hudson Links transit system on the new New York Bridge, have been on our wish list for years. Unfortunately, as they say, the devil is in the details, or in this case, the lack of details in this executive budget. The executive budget reveals that Governor Cuomo's plan for funding the MTA's capital needs is nothing but smoke and mirrors. This budget contains no appropriation for the MTA, not only this year, but in any of the outlying years. There is only a reappropriation of the $1 billion from last year's budget. While we were supportive of the agreement made this summer between the Governor Cuomo and Mayor de Blasio, we see now that the governor has had an entirely different idea of a fully funded MTA capital plan. The executive budget redefines the concept of parity. Drivers will be getting real dollars in their roads and bridges, fixed as part of NYSDOT's capital plan, and the new New York Bridge will be receiving $2 billion total from the bank settlement funds. Instead of comparable cash, the MTA will be getting an IOU. This budget leaves the door wide open to be funded with an unsustainable level of debt financing for the MTA. Drivers will be getting a toll reduction worth $340 million, according to the Thruway Authority, while downstate transit riders will be saddled with a transit system facing an uncertain future, and upstate transit riders will be getting an underfunded capital plan as well. We understand that every capital plan has some debt, but the executive budget introduces substantial risk to transit riders. As history has shown, unsustainable debt puts pressure on the MTA's operating budget, increasing the likelihood of future fare increases and service cuts, negatively impacting low-income transit riders. There's also the risk that projects will be slowed down or fall off the table in later years, and the state's promised commitment will be pushed off. The ambiguous language in the Article 7 legislation leaves the potential for no money to be put into the MTA by the state until 2019. By 2019, as the debt bomb explodes, the governor's term and potentially his commitment to this plan will be ended. There should be parity between the MTA and roads and bridges, but a different kind of parity than you've heard today. The Capital Plan Review Board needs to approve the MTA's capital program immediately. It's a year late. And real dollars need to be put into the 2016-2017 budget, along with a clear timeline and certainty of funding sources for the plan. We support NYPTA's testimony concerning the non-MTA transit. Multi-year capital funding is the key for establishing stable transit systems, both upstate and down. We applaud the executive budget for including a 5-year capital plan for upstate transit, but that capital plan is not fully funded. That's a $1 billion capital plan. It has a $500 million gap. And the executive budget only puts $295 million into that. We are particularly concerned that there is no capital funding for downstate transit, suburban transit systems, such as Westchester's B-Line service and Nassau County's NICE systems. Just this past Sunday, 11 bus routes were eliminated in Nassau County, in part because there's a $7.5 million deficit in NICE's budget. So in order to prevent similar cuts to transit across the state, we urge you to fully fund the $500 million gap in NYPTA's proposed 5-year capital plan. I really want to thank all of the legislators today for hammering on the fact that there is no list of projects coming out of NYSDOT. If you'll allow me a moment of being candid, It's ridiculous that you have not gotten a list of projects, and you haven't gotten it for the last several years since I've been here. You've had a list out of the MTA for their capital plan since October of 2014. And Commissioner Driscoll said that you're not going to see anything until the budget deal is done today. You shouldn't let that stand. In March of 2015, the legislature also approved a 2-year capital plan for NYSDOT in your budget, the last budget cycle, and we still haven't seen the list of projects for that. And the MOU that was negotiated with the governor's office has not been signed, has not been released to the public. Details are sorely lacking in this executive budget. There was mention that the Hudson Links transit across the New York Bridge is fully funded. There's a $31 million gap, and we could not find the appropriation in the budget. So this is problematic. It's a new bus system that's expected to be launched in 23 months. There should be an appropriation. There should be a list of projects. A press release that came out of the governor's office on January 5th mentions that NYSDOT's Complete Streets funding will be used to partially fund a $100 million downtown revitalization initiative. To our knowledge, there is no so-called Complete Streets funding, unless the governor is referring to the dedicated federal dollars that are coming out of D.C. And if that's the case, if it's the governor's plan to siphon off these much-needed dollars for downtown Hunger Games, we would definitely encourage you instead to have a dedicated fund of state dollars for bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure that is on top of what is already being spent to the tune of $20 million a year. And thank you, Chairman Farrell, for your question earlier to the Commissioner as to whether there was bicycle and pedestrian funding in this budget. And for the past several years, the Bronx community has been calling for the inclusion of $3 million in NYSDOT's capital plan to fund the environmental review for the reconfiguration of the Sheridan Expressway. Again, without a detailed list of capital projects, there's no way to tell if this funding has been included in this executive budget. In conclusion, the opaque and unregulated process for developing the NYSDOT capital plan must change. The state legislature must statutorily require NYSDOT to submit a 5-year capital plan with defined projects that is subject to public review prior to passage of the state budget, and require NYSDOT to report on the progress of that plan. The MTA does it. NYSDOT can do it as well. New York needs its capital planning to be done transparently, comprehensively, and in a coordinated, long-term manner. The MTA and NYSDOT capital plans need to be submitted for consideration at the same time, every 5 years, based on a 20-year needs assessment. Given that the MOU process has clearly broken down, this needs to be statutory requirement. It is the only way that we're going to be able to assure parity in this system. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Railroads of New York Incorporated, Scott Wigger, Executive Director.
Good afternoon. Thanks for the opportunity to testify here today. My name is Scott Wigger. I'm the Executive Director for Railroads of New York. We're an organization that represents the freight rail industry here in New York State. It's comprised of 4 Class 1 railroads, CSX, Canadian National, Canadian Pacific, and Norfolk Southern, and 34 short line and regional railroads here in the state. Our members directly employ over 3,700 individuals. We allow our customers access to the nationwide 140,000-mile rail network, which gives access to both coasts and all U.S. ports and shipment of goods. Besides the substantial competitive advantage that businesses enjoy that have rail access and thus access to this network, there's many environmental benefits we provide, such as reduced pollution, better fuel efficiency, reduced highway congestion, and less wear and tear on the roads. In regards to the governor's executive budget proposal, in it is contained a $10 million allocation for freight rail projects and another $10 million allocation for a mix of freight, passenger, and port projects, freight rail, passenger, rail, and port projects. We appreciate the work that was done to reestablish this program 3 years ago by the legislature and the governor's office. But this has been at the same funding level for those last 3 years, the same $20 million level since it was reestablished. RONI believes this budget year provides a unique opportunity for us to fully fund this program at a $50 million level, which is the level it was at during the 2005-2010 Bond Act years. We see increased attention these days on transportation infrastructure, and we appreciate that that's a focus these days, as we feel it's very important. However, when we look at the rest of DOT's budget funding, we see all the other modes, roads, bridges, transit, airports, all getting proposed increased funding allocations, while the freight rail allocation is proposed to remain flat. So it's a little, disconcerting for us, but we still look forward to working with the legislature and governor's office to work to build this up to the aforementioned $50 million level. Just as with all modes of transportation infrastructure, the freight rail infrastructure, just gradually deteriorates due to time, wear and tear, and whatnot. And at the same time, it's projected that freight rail volumes are going to increase. Last year, U.S. DOT put out a report saying they expect freight rail volumes to increase by 49% by the year 2040, which just means putting more strain on the system. Our railroads invest heavily in capital repair, maintenance, and expansion projects. We do, there's direct economic benefits when we do expansion projects, whether providing enhanced services to existing customers, providing rail access to businesses currently without rail service, or just locating rail infrastructure in areas of the state that currently lack access to the rail network, so that when prospective businesses are looking at the state to locate their operations, like a manufacturing facility requesting rail access, it's certainly an incentive to locate here in New York. We certainly need help with the state funding to help with the projects we can't finance ourselves. With the repair projects, obviously we have to do those first because the safety of our system is of foremost importance. So as more and more funding has to go for maintenance projects, that's less and less we have for economic development projects. So as such, we support the development of this DOT 5-year capital plan. We support funding it at the same $50 million per year level, totaling $250 million over the 5-year period. This long-term investment planning would allow our railroads to undertake more innovative capital projects to expand economic development efforts, and also allow us time for better collaboration with local businesses and economic development organizations for better planning and cost effectiveness. As far as the scoring, since we reestablished this program, it's been scored through the DOT scoring process and not the regional council scoring process, which we appreciate and certainly support. We appreciate the efforts by the legislature and the governor to keep it that way. Just with transportation, infrastructure investments in general, it's hard to localize on a regional basis the benefits any one project would have on the entire statewide network. And the jobs often, get created with our customers, not necessarily with our railroads themselves. So that's hard to quantify as well. Except for DOT, they are properly positioned to keep scoring them this way. And just, as far as the needs of the system, I've said this past years before. The 2009 DOT rail plan puts the needs of the freight rail network at about $390 million a year over a 5-year period, totaling nearly $2 billion. About half of those identified needs are just to keep the existing system in safe condition and to bring it up to a state of good repair. What you'll see is what we did recently, attached to my testimony, is we did a survey of our own members, just asking for projects that you can't do without state assistance. And as you'll see, there's over $350 million worth of projects listed there. They show short and long-term needs. There's a variety of projects, repair, maintenance, economic development, expansion in all corners of the state. So we hope this helps to illustrate the needs of the system. I appreciate the time today to come up here and testify, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Any questions?
Yes, and
Senator?
I know Assemblyman Farrell reacted at first at the thickness of your packet, and he was worried you were going to read every page. But I want to thank you for the detail on the $350 million of shovel-ready projects that could be undertaken across the state. Very helpful to the legislators to see what the potential could be. So I just want to give my thanks to you for that. Glad to see their projects for Allegheny, Cattaraugus, Chautauqua, and Livingston counties in the mix, and look forward to working with you in the future.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hi. I don't know if you heard me when I asked the earlier testifier whether public transit, mass transit was defined as economic development for the various economic development funds we distribute throughout the state. So I have the same question for you. Is freight rail eligible to participate in the regional economic councils or the regional $500 million competitions, and has rail freight gotten any money?
Sure. Technically, yes, we're eligible, but on a practical basis, it just doesn't work. Like I said, when you go through the regional council process, they're looking at their regions alone. Whereas we do a project, say the Portageville Bridge, for example, it's out in the western southern tier area of the state. That's really to allow us to go from Buffalo to Albany more consistently instead of having to dip through Pennsylvania. So if you're just looking at it on that localized basis, you won't see the benefits all around. So, and also the fact we're not creating direct jobs with like a maintenance project or a repair project, that's not going to score well at all. So unless we're talking about like a manufacturer who wants to come to the state and they want direct rail access, like that's a project that would score well because those are some direct jobs that would score. But otherwise, we're just not competitive there.
Thank you. And so I come from New York City, and I spent a lot of time talking to people throughout the state about how we do a better job of bringing New York State agriculture down into New York City. I always describe, I have a city of 9 million people who want to eat what New York State produces. But there's the constant struggles of the trucking patterns of trying to truck so much food into New York City, and our lack of competition with the costs because of that. Are there specific efforts in rail freight that would expand the ability, if you were funded, to ensure better access for upstate agricultural producers to move their food downstate?
Well, the project would rest with the rail companies themselves, the ones that serve that area and that go, from upstate to downstate, because, some are just regionalized, some just go east-west. So it rests with those companies, but of course, any good business is going to look to expand their business. So that's definitely an opportunity we see there. If we shift it from trucks to rail, we're certainly available for that.
But none of these projects specifically in this giant package are specific to agricultural freight, or you don't know what
Top
ratio of your rail freight is agricultural?
Yeah, not sure. I'd have to look through it again. But
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
New York State Association of Towns, Superintendent of Highways, Jeff Griswold, President. New York State County Highway Superintendent Association, Kevin O'Brien, President. And the next person is Jeremy Martell. If you would come down now, it would make it. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Senator Young, Assemblyman Farrell, and other members of the legislature. I am Jeffrey Griswold, President of the New York State Association of Town Superintendents of Highways, and I'm the Town of Preble Highway Superintendent. With me representing the Town of Palmyra, also my first Vice President, is Michael Basil. We apologize, but at the same time this is happening, the County Highway Superintendent, Kevin O'Brien, is at a swearing-in ceremony for their association. We appreciate this opportunity to submit testimony for your consideration as you review the Governor's 2016-2017 budget. We'd like to begin by thanking you, the members of the legislature, for your steadfast support of local roads and bridges As you know, our collective membership is responsible for ensuring the safe operation of 87% of the state's public roads, half of its bridges, and plowing not only our huge system, but over a quarter of the New York State DOT's roads. Every time there is a winter weather event, the hardworking men and women of our local crews ensure New York drivers get to and from schools, hospital, work, and other destinations safely. We are pleased to see Governor Cuomo propose increased funding levels in the executive budget for the New York State DOT capital plan and the new additional programs for local and state bridges and roads. As part of this proposed capital plan is a $1 billion Pave New York program to be split evenly between state and locals. Another new program is the $1 billion Bridge New York to replace and rehabilitate bridges. Like Pave New York, we have been told the monies for Bridge New York will also be split 50-50 between the state and the localities. However, it is imperative to note that this $20.1 billion proposed 5-year New York State DOT capital plan funding level is not enough to prevent the further deterioration of New York's highways and bridge system. The governor's proposal maintains the CHIP funding level at $438 million and $39.7 million for Marchicelli, but does not include the $50 million extreme winter recovery money we received last year. There is also a $500 million for an extreme weather infrastructure hardening program for investments in roadways statewide that are susceptible to flooding. But it is not clear how this funding would be distributed or if local roads are eligible for a fair share. Our associations support a 5-year allocation of $3.7 billion, $742 million annually, in CHIPS Marchicelli funding and $750 million or $150 million annually for a local bridge and culvert program. The executive budget includes a 5-year, $1 billion Bridge New York program split between the state and localities. This proposal appears to be an improvement over the current state and local initiative that is part of the current budget. When the first 2 years of the 5-year, $750 million program was allocated, New York State DOT, who chose the projects with no local input, split the number of state and local projects equally. 23 are locals, 23 state-owned. However, the state bridge projects totaled 55% of the funds, and just 2 locally owned bridges in New York City accounted for 66% of the local bridge funding allocation. We're hoping that the new Bridge New York program is more effective in achieving regional balance and maximizing local decision-making and flexibility, which is why we are requesting the local Bridge New York funding be distributed through CHIPS. We cannot emphasize enough the importance that both local portions of the Pave New York and Bridge New York programs be distributed through the CHIPS formula and be funded with state dollars, not federal funds. By using CHIPS as the funding mechanism for the local side of the program, every municipality across New York State will benefit. The CHIPS formula is based on local highway mileage for all municipalities and motor vehicle registrations for counties and New York City. This formula allows the local highway superintendents and commissioners of public works, the experts in their localities, to make decisions on what road, bridge, and culvert rehabilitation and reconstruction is most important. We are also pleased the executive budget includes a 5-year DOT capital plan, which will allow long-term predictable funding levels and more effective planning. This fall, for the first time, the administration did not release a DOT 5-year capital needs analysis. which we believe to be in excess of $28 billion. Traditionally, the funding levels for both the DOT and MPA systems were based on multi-year needs analysis and were released in advance of the adoption of the 5-year capital programs.